was just going to say, I haven't turned my microphone on, so nobody can hear me. Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Dye. I'm chairing this meeting. Can I remind everybody that today's meeting is being live streamed on the Leeds City Council YouTube channel, so the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. And can I remind members to, first of all, turn your microphone on when you want to speak, and then mute it when you've finished speaking, please. So let's start by members introducing themselves, so we'll go round from that side. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Andy Rowntree from Kirkstall.
Thank you, Chair. And it's Councillor Mohammed Shazad from Moortown and Meanwood.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Adele Ray. I'm Councillor for Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Good morning. Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley and Wortley Ward. I'm substituting for Penny Stables.
Good morning. Councillor Barry Anderson, Adelaide Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you, everybody. And now shall we go round and officers introduce themselves, starting from here, please.
Good morning, everyone. Rachel Waterhouse, Policy Officer for Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Morning, everyone. Mark Garford from the Flood Climate Resilience Management Team.
Morning, everybody. Jonathan Moxon, Flood and Climate Resilience Management.
Morning, everybody. Andrew White, Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Helen Gray. I'm the clerk today.
Good morning. Polly Kirk, Chief Officer, Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to our meeting this morning. So, Helen, do you want to start with the first few items, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals. Agenda item 2, the agenda contains no exempt information. Agenda item 3, there are no late items added to the agenda. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to make any declarations that they may have? And I can see none. Thank you. Apologies for absence. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Carlisle, and Councillor Stables and Councillor Blackburn is here as substitute. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Rafiq has joined us. Do you want to introduce yourself, Councillor? Oh, no, hang on, not yet.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for the delay. Mohammed Rafiq, Chapel Alton Ward, and I'm the Exec Board Member for Climate, Energy, Environment and Green Spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to start by looking at the minutes of the previous meeting, which was in June. So they start on page 5, and I will go through the minutes page by page. If you have anything you'd like to correct or any matters arising, please bring them up as I go through that page. So first one is page 5. Page 6. So on that page, can I just remind everybody that we have a scheduled visit to Lotherton Hall on the 5th of September. So just an additional reminder to come along to that if you can, please.
Has an invitation been sent out? Because I don't think I've seen a formal invitation.
There isn't anything in diaries yet, is there, Rachel? But I think that should go in as soon as possible.
Yes, it's a colleague in my team who will be sending out those invitations, so they should come to you in the next couple of days.
Yeah, so we asked for that to get done so that it's all in your diaries. Okay, so page 7. So just one from me, that I was asked after our open forum to write to Exec Board and the West Yorkshire Pension Fund, which I have done, and I am yet to receive any replies. Page 8. Page 9. So just another reminder from me. The link got put into the minutes for the climate course Don't know if anybody's had a go at it yet, but it seems to be getting quite a good reaction. When I first logged on to it to do it, I think it had 600 people sign up, and now it's got over 2,000. So if you're interested, please follow that link and give it a go. Okay, page 10. So the only thing from me on that page is the CDP feedback. As of last week, we hadn't had any. Is that still true, Rachel?
Yes, that's still correct. No feedback as of yet.
Okay, so we will bring it to you when we do. And then page 11. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the minutes, so we can agree that they are accurate. And that then brings us on to item 7. So we did think we had somebody for open forum up until about 9 o'clock when they're not here. So hopefully we'll pick that up and we'll have them in September. But as always, if there's anybody that you would like to come and present to us, then please let Rachel know and we will have people along. Okay, thank you. So that then takes us to item 8. So Rachel, do you want to introduce this and let us know how it's going to go?
Sure, thank you, Chair. So as you know, we changed this year the format, so instead of having different items for each meeting, we're now grouping them by theme. So the theme this time round is climate adaptation. So I'm going to start with a presentation alongside my colleague Andrew, and then we'll move on to presentations by Jonathan and Mark as well. And then if it's okay with you, Chair, we'll sort of do the presentations first and take all questions, any questions at the end.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. So it'll be a second. I will just load up and present my screen for you, which hopefully will work a bit quicker than it usually does. It's promising. So yeah, so I'm going to give a general overview about climate adaptation, where we currently are as a council and perhaps a wider city, and in terms of physical infrastructure as well as messaging and communication, and addressing how we're looking at obviously addressing climate change. So just to start with, a bit of an updated information in relation to the climate, the impact of climate on the city and well, the wider city, which I'm sure you won't be surprised at. So just to a few pointers there, that 2024 was actually the second warmest year on record for the UK. And what's interesting to note is that now the top 10 warmest years on record have all occurred since 2000, and half of those have been in the most recent decade. As many of you will know, that last year, the warmest spring, it was on record, and February was the second warmest itself on record, so quite evident piece of information there that shows how much the climate is impacting on our city. And then it's just worth noting as well that a lot of from June 23 to 24, it was noticeable in that the west and northwest of Leeds have been considerably wetter than the remainder of the city. And 11 of these months during this period had exceeded the average rainfall for the month, which in comparison perhaps to the last couple of months, you could say, apart from maybe the last couple of days locally, has probably been a very different story. So just a very quick reminder in terms of when it comes to us measuring sort of the emissions for what we could refer to scope 1, 2 or 3, I just thought it was a timely reminder when sort of going through the presentation that we just sort of make sure people are aware of what they are. So as it says there, scope 1 are direct emissions from our owned or controlled sources. Scope 2 are indirect emissions from the generation of purchased energy. And somewhat what can be the confusing ones at times, or the more challenging ones to record as such, are scope 3 emissions, so indirect emissions not included in scope 2 that occur in the value chain, such as our procurement chains, both in upstream and downstream emissions. So that's just a quick graph there. Hopefully it's big enough and clear enough on the screens, just to show that difference between 2005 and the 2021 emissions by sector. So as you can see, in the most part that there's a considerable difference in some categories more than others in terms of what we've done as a city. The one that doesn't change too much is the agriculture, forestry and land use one, but I don't think that really comes as a surprise given the build-up of Leeds itself. And just a reminder that our 4 hazards, as we deem them, and climate risk to Leeds, the 4 that we focus on are heat, flooding, drought and cascading impacts. So these have remained the same throughout. We've always focused on these 4. And cascading impacts, we sort of, as an example, is poor weather or extreme heat, for example, in Europe, and it affects the likes of food supply chains. So it's like that indirect impact from something that's actually happening itself. Obviously, drought and heat we'll be familiar with, and potentially even the flash flooding or surface water flooding most recently as well. So the general aims of climate adaptation, we refer to them as the 3 Ps. So we've got prevent, protect and prepare. There is almost like an optional 4th one, which is actions that enable the city to quickly recover after a hazard has occurred. We'd like to think that we don't actually reach that one because we've done the other 3 in advance of that. So preventing hazards from occurring, protecting the city from harm and damage, and preparing to respond effectively to an occurring hazard. So the graphic on the right hand side sort of shows you the different ways in which they all overlap in terms of vulnerability, the actual event itself, exposure to the event, and then in the middle you've got the direct risk. So we obviously have to look at how we do these 3 things to, like I say, to avoid reaching step 4, but at the same time have our plans in place should it be that we need to recover as opposed to prevent something. Just a couple of examples with images on the screen there. So the prevention, a little while ago now, with simple things such as literature relating to gardens, don't pave it, save it, talking about making sort of driveways and gardens permeable to ensure that there's not increased flooding, surface water flooding. And then on the left hand side is an example of the natural flood risk management, but I won't touch too much on flood related matters because I've got colleagues obviously in the room who will be able to talk about that a little bit more. There is another example again. It's because I think it's because there's quite obvious examples come from at times the flood risk team. The reducing exposure to the hazard and protecting our an asset, city infrastructure, residents. So we've got the example there of protecting from future flood risks, but we've also got examples such as, from the flip side, looking at how we improve building measures as well to ensure that they stay cool during high temperatures. And for preparation, we've got the example here is, which some of you may be familiar with. Once we had the heat waves in July 2022, we produced a heatwave sort of guidance and checklist, mostly for the staff, but this was also for internal staff and how they dealt and how they could do business as usual throughout the actual the work that they do, and make sure that residents and vulnerable users were protected as well. So part of that was a heatwave checklist. The right hand side graphic is just a documentation that was published, which made sure that it was people going around saying, for example, their building had sufficient air conditioning, if the windows needed checking, if they had sufficient blinds in place, was it suitable to use during high temperatures. And then that formed part of a group that we were working in, and we updated external and internal communications packs, made sure that guidance for service needs and communities were all made sure that they were covered, but also staff wellbeing and vulnerable users wellbeing was also covered during heat waves. So fortunately we've not quite reached the scale and heights of that July 2022 heat wave since that point, but rest assured we have actually got documentation now in place which covers. So that's just a piece of work and an example of what we do in terms of reaching another heat wave. And then I just thought it was key to mention, as always, although these are external partners that we're working with, I think part of our role as well is that we actually work well with, so the immediate climate and energy and green spaces team work well with other teams within the council to make sure that we actually all have the same messaging. We make sure that we all are working on the same narrative. We're all achieving the same ambitions. Just towards the end of last week, I actually took out some colleagues within our Green Spaces team so they could actually see some of the projects and some of the work that we're doing throughout the city to adapt to the climate. And that's just within our immediate team. We were able to sort of share the messaging, and so they could actually see and feedback to people that they work with that and pass the messaging on and just show what we can actually do throughout the city. I suppose linking to that through communication and engagement, I suppose realistically, we know from conversations that we've had in this meeting and other meetings before that the key messaging is that we're transparent and everything is we provide the facts and we let people make their own individual choices. We don't force opinion on people. We make sure they've got all the information they need to make informed decisions. So we've got enable, explain and engage. So enabling the successful delivery of climate related projects, explaining our policy and actions, and engaging the whole city to inform policy and encourage action. So that might be through consultations, that might be through open workshops, but giving people the opportunity to feedback on what is their city and their lives as well, to make sure that residents are at the heart of everything that we do. And just a couple of examples there of how we help signpost people to where they need to be. So on the left hand side, we've got an example of the Clean Air Leeds segment of the website, which informs people about where they can find out about air pollution, air quality, what we're doing to address it, how people can report air quality and pollution issues and protecting themselves from air pollution. And then on the right hand side, we've got an example of how people can make the best use of the food and avoiding food waste, and just general tips that would help people in terms of reducing their own consumption and emissions and ensuring that they're making the best of what they've got. So then just to flip side more from the messaging side, flip back to, as I would deem, infrastructure. Appreciate the text is very small. I'll just pull out a couple of highlights from there. So we address that with the climate change. We need to make sure that we're adapting physically our buildings, infrastructure, to ensure that they're not, they're basically not put under the pressure and therefore have a detrimental impact on people who live, work and travel around the city. So for this one, for example, is relating to housing. So many of you will know, because I'm sure things will have happened within your own wards. We committed to retrofitting £100 million worth of investment of council housing back in March 2021. More than 60 million of this has now been completed. And the messaging that that we work with our residents to tell them it's not just about the climate impacts and reduction of the climate impacts that they're creating. It's actually ensuring that residents have got healthier, comfier homes that are cheaper to keep warm. So there's an actual personal health message running through there as well. And as well as the social housing, we've also delivered a number of other housing retrofit schemes. There's a couple of examples on the right hand side there that we've got. And interestingly enough, the top right, the map there is identifying, it's effectively an aerial satellite heat map. So it identified where the worst, the least efficient houses were in terms of the obviously emission of heat that they had. And just a couple of other ones just to point out is we've got the houses in Holbeck retrofit, which was whole house upgrades, which improved energy efficiency and again secured warmer and healthier homes for residents. And residents said they saved around £350 to £400 in energy bills, and it actually cut the carbon footprint for the city by 1,450 tonnes. And the final one there, just to note, is the Home Upgrade Grant scheme, number 2 scheme, which assisted mainly low-income residents who didn't have gas central heating. So 251 properties have benefited from this, so they were able to effectively tap into lower, sort of cheaper to run the homes, low efficiency heating measures. And then we've got the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, acronym for that, PSDS. So to date, £50 million in grant funding has allowed for corporate school buildings to be decarbonised. So the 4 images there show you a combination of some of the work. So we've got solar PV on the top 2 photographs, and then we've got the various heat pumps on the second section as well. So the measures of the PSDS scheme include air source heat pumps, upgrading building management schemes, and solar PV. And it's roughly 75 buildings to date that have been complete through this. And the again, making buildings more efficient, heavily reducing the carbon emissions, and just generally making those buildings a lot more pleasant to actually be in and actually operate within. Just very briefly on transport, because I appreciate there's a lot more outside of our immediate team that we do feed into, but there's many more schemes that are out there. So just that we lead by example and still have the largest zero emission fleet of any local authority in the country. Excuse me. And just on the right hand side there, we've got examples of the charges per 100,000 people in relation to ourselves and the national figure on the right hand side there. And where on the bottom graph, we've actually got it's the rapid or above charges per 100,000 people. So again, showing the dark green is local authority and the lighter shade is the national picture. And although we originally just started with 129 public charge points in October 21, there's now currently over 550 public charges, and there's still more yet because obviously we're very much adapting to the changing scene in terms of the increase of EV uptake, making sure that houses of all kinds have accessibility to those charge points as well. And I will probably not as smooth as I wanted to, I will now move over to my colleague Andrew, who will take on the next few slides. So if you're ready, Andrew, I can flick over if that's okay.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm just going to talk about two areas, and I think particularly following on from what Rachel's spoken about in terms of hazards. We're very much looking at hazards, risk, probability, impact, vulnerability, and I've chosen two areas that I think particularly might be worth discussing today. But also, if this is a theme that we've got for the rest of this year as well, we can share some more information. I've put very brief links to some really long national reports and studies and case studies and things like that, which I don't think is useful to go into loads of detail today, but I can share them with you afterwards. So the first one is the Leeds Food Strategy. So we've got those three themes, and I think if we've got 4 city ambitions, it may well be necessary for us to revise the food strategy against the 4 ambitions as well. So the focus on those particularly is we've got a work plan for each of those areas: health and well-being, food security and economy, sustainability and resilience. And actually, climate adaptation touches across all 3. So the supply of availability of healthy food, in terms of income and ability to buy healthy food, local food, and particularly sustainability and resilience. I'm not always clear where climate adaptation ends and resilience begins. And I think that's part of those, like you said, Rachel, part of that approach is preparing for some things that might not happen and some things that might happen more frequently. And also, if we prepare in the right way, some of them will happen with less impact. So we're not always sure exactly the impact of what we're preparing for. If we go to the next slide. Thanks. So here's just an example. It's not specifically climate adaptation, but it's new this spring. So this is an insert that we've added at the menu at Temple Newson Tea Rooms. And it's the first of what we hope will be very many carbon calculations on our menu. So initially, I think it would be other cafes in green spaces. And we're putting carbon measures. So this is about the amount of CO2 per kilogram of that food. We're not serving food in that in the portions of a kilogram at Temple Newson Tea Rooms, but we're factoring those up. And if it's per kilo of food, if it's less than 2 kilos of CO2, that would be green. If it's more than 4 kilos of CO2 per kilo of food in proportion, that will be red. And at the moment, we've got 2 items on the menu at Temple Newson Tea Rooms, and the aim is to expand that to the other cafes, and if we can, to plug it into the catering menus that we've got, and then we would have calculators of the food that is cooked from scratch under the council's catering services. We've got some freeware carbon calculation software from the university, and it's something that we hope to expand over the next time. But I think in part of this is about preparing to have information so it fits with that communication side of climate adaptation. But again, it's a new initiative that we've developed, and it's one of the actions under the Leeds Food Strategy under sustainability and resilience, which is why it's here today. Okay, next slide. And I think particularly there's an overlap between food systems, vulnerability, and climate change. And I'm just drawing on national reports over the last 6 or 7 months. So it's December 2024 is the United Kingdom Food Security Report. Climate is mentioned something like 25 times in the report, and that's talking about food security in terms of supply chains, in terms of farmers, in terms of middlemen, in terms of what appears on the shelves themselves, as we've seen from Rachel's slide. But it's also about the price of those items as well. So you'll know from your shopping there, certain items have gone up enormously in price. Other food items have not gone up in price. I read on my phone on the train going in this morning. Apparently potatoes are going up in price because of impacts of adverse weather. So that's either the potato harvest in the UK or even potato harvest abroad. And if you have a poor harvest, then you get a price increase. So there's more there, and I think I'll share the link with you. Also, I'll provide a link to the exec summary so you can see a little bit more information there. And then this month, so July 2025, we finally have the UK government food strategy for England. That's the link in the slides to the wider report. We're still digesting it. Our friends in Sustainable Food Places, who we've got bronze status for the city, have already given us I was going to say a digest then, that's not a pun. They've given us a summary of what they've taken from the strategy, where they think that might be useful then for large metropolitan authorities and where they're looking at food partnerships. So that's the link. So the third one there is the Sustainable Food Place, and that's their link to the National Food Strategy. I think particularly in Leeds, we are talking the language of vulnerability. So where we talk about some of the measures that we've got under the food strategy that aren't all linked to climate change, but 5 fruit and veg a day, or the links then to the Marmot Cities outcomes in terms of school children's dental health and so on. We do know that the availability of healthy food that their parents can afford is really relevant. And if you get an interruption, you get empty shelves, as we've just seen. You get interruption to supply chains. If you get interruption as well through weather for the ability of parents and families to work and so on, then that's going to have an impact then on the way food is served, the way the food is delivered, the way that food is prepared and eaten, and it links to food waste as well. You can have food waste actually that happens in the fields if the crop can't be harvested. Sorry, that sounds really down, I think, around that, but I think we're talking about sort of outcomes and how they impact on food. And actually what we've got in the food strategy is levers to try and encourage the better outcomes that we've got. So that would be, we're starting school holidays, that would be school holiday clubs, that would be healthy weight, that would be all of those measures that we've got there. And I think particularly there we are targeting, as well as there being a universal offering, we are targeting those areas where the outcomes are most in jeopardy there. Okay, next slide please, Rachel. Sorry, that's a really busy slide as well, but I'll make sure in the links that it's clear. And then particularly, so I've got 2 slides on air quality as well. And again, I think air quality shares the focus of climate adaptation on risk and vulnerability. So I think we've always spoken about clean air, and I've just provided you some information here. And this has come from Jim McQuaid at the university, and Jim particularly is really, if we're talking about sort of guest speakers and so on, I know it's not exactly climate emergency, but I think particularly there, if we're interested in vulnerability as part of this theme, I think it would be really useful to share some information from the university. So particularly we are breathing in climate change, including warmer air, and I've just provided an example there of how many times you're breathing in every day, 11 to 12,000 litres of air every day. So it's enormous. And again, for people who've already got an underlying health outcome, or who have already got certain circumstances there, and I'll talk about that in the second slide. The main focus in Leeds has been the monitoring of nitrogen dioxide and the 2 sorts of particulates as well. There is an email going around some councillors last week saying the council or the city is not monitoring particulates. I'll make sure that we've got a link to it. It's called the Purple Air sensors. We've got something like 30 sensors across the city. We absolutely are doing that. It's provided through monitors that are provided through the university and through other provisions. So particularly there is an overlap. You've got warm air. You've also got a lot of air going through your lungs every day. And for people who've got other health conditions, we just move to the next slide, please, Rachel. There are more vulnerabilities. I think particularly, so again, this came out, was it the end of June? The Director of Public Health report, so this is called Heat in the City. Again, climate mentioned 10, 15 times there. Some of the examples in the report are provided by Climate Energy and Green Spaces. We also have those areas of sort of promotion, communication. So the Clean Air Day, I've provided a link there to the Clean Air Hub, which is sort of a landing point when there isn't a Clean Air Day or Clean Air Night. Lots and lots of monitoring. Maybe one of the things we want to do is to make sure that communication of what that monitoring is showing. I think we want to make sure that that is easy for people to find on their mobile phones. And I think particularly when I talk about air quality with other authorities in West Yorkshire, we have got Leeds Air Pollution and Health Forum that reports to Health and Wellbeing Board. I'm not necessarily sure that relationship is as strong in other cities. That's something, again, that I think we should be quite pleased that we've got that forum. That focus on health outcomes in Leeds, if you're breathing in poor air quality outside your property, you're possibly also breathing in poor air quality within your property as well. So things like ventilation. There's some really interesting studies from public health about ventilation, older people in accommodation where they don't open the window, they've got a gas fire, there's not an extractor in the kitchen, and actually that's a recipe then. If you've got asthma or a lung condition, that's actually a recipe for more admissions to hospital. There was a presentation from a Leeds GP at the last Air Pollution and Health Forum, which is probably 2 weeks ago now, just on that study of admissions presentations at hospitals around that. And what our public health colleagues are doing is they're working backwards upstream together with the GPs, together with the clinical commissioning groups to find out exactly why. And that might be, for example, children with asthma, or it might be, for example, people living in housing of a certain type where there isn't as good ventilation. I do think one of the things that we would want to do on the vulnerability and climate change thing particularly is to really get into those areas of hot air with certain particles, so those particulates that I mentioned, and to really find ways of getting people to understand, for example, fires in the back garden, wood burning, or even gas hobs without extractor fans and so on. We've started to do some of that. So it's in some of the most recent annual reports. It's in the air quality action plan. We want to find ways to get that information out with those meaningful sort of case studies as well. I think that's the end. Is it, Rachel, from me?
It is, yeah.
Fine.
It is. I was just going to say quickly, adding on that, which Andrew mentioned for the first part, the public health report. If you've not had a chance to see it yet, I think there's actually there's a press release on it as well. If you've not had a chance to see it, there's actually a really good video that accompanies it as well, and that's shares residents' views about how they how they cope in the heat or how they don't cope in the heat wave, and the impacts on their own health, impacts on communities, and how they can and they're looking at ways in which they can access cooler spaces and what can be done to ensure that any future events like that people are actually prioritised even more than they already are. So it is actually worth a really good read and watch, but obviously we can share those links afterwards. So I'll come out of my presentation now, and then I'll leave it to Jonathan and Mark, who will be able to pick up on their areas of work.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. So we're going to be giving an update on the local flood risk management strategy in Leeds today. So the strategy is a key document, and it's a guide for the activities undertaken by risk management authorities operating across the Leeds district. Whilst it covers all sources of flooding, it focuses on local flooding such as surface water and flooding from ordinary watercourses too. The previous document was produced in 2018, which is obviously prior to when we declared the climate emergency. So we feel it's important that the update, which is being carried out this year, reflects that in its approach. So as we can see here, we've got a general overview of fluvial flood risk in Leeds. So it will still cover the traditional information that any local flood risk management strategy would do, and also surface water as well. But we're looking to give it an added flavour that is fit for 2025 and beyond. So I won't focus too much on this slide, but we just wanted to demonstrate here that we will be following a standard approach of hazard identification and then taking it through the various processes. But the important point is obviously action. We can write as many reports as we like, but the people, the businesses of Leeds expect action, so that's what it needs to ultimately lead to. I did press the button twice, so.
It's not playing ball.
No, it's not.
I'll see if I can join and you can try it again, Matt.
Yeah. Okay. Apologies about that. So, as I was saying, it's important that we take a slightly different approach with the update to the strategy, and look elsewhere. Look to other countries to seek inspiration from those two, other cities within the UK. As we've been hearing earlier today, water priorities. They're stretched. During times of flood risk, we're desperately trying to stop water getting into certain places. But equally, it's a precious resource, and it needs to be managed well during the times when it's scarce. So our consultants, AECOM, will be looking for examples such as Copenhagen, little bit closer to home in Mansfield. Got some really good examples of blue-green infrastructure across the area there, which it's important to note that whilst it's managing flood risk, it actually improves the amenity too. It's got many other benefits. You know, we've touched on air quality and such like. So this is the kind of thing that we're looking to bring into the document. Citywide strategies. You know, we've a couple of examples here with the Thames Tideway tunnel. You know, that's quite a significant, you know, 25-kilometre tunnel to reduce sewage getting into the River Thames. So maybe not something quite like that, but the point is, rather than delivering schemes in kind of isolation for certain locations, we could be talking about small changes across the city, which cumulative have a big impact, such as Philadelphia here, retrofitting a third of the city with permeable surfaces for that very reason. So the suggestion that we are making as part of this update is that we focus on protection through innovation. So we will invest in cutting-edge infrastructure that not only mitigates flood risk, but enhances the city's green and blue spaces. Building on the success of the Leeds Flood Alleviation Scheme, we will deliver pioneering projects such as adaptable flood defences, enhanced natural flood management solutions, and the integration of sustainable drainage systems, also known as SUDs, across urban and rural developments, highways and public realm schemes. These interventions will balance robust protection with the preservation of biodiversity, amenity and carbon reduction goals. Number 2, preparation for a changing climate. Leeds is committed to a proactive approach to climate adaptation. We will embed flood and climate resilience management into all aspects of urban planning and regeneration, utilising predictive analytics and advanced hydrological modelling. We will identify future flood risks and prioritise investments. Education and community engagement will empower residents and businesses to prepare for and recover quickly from flood events. This includes clear communication plans, accessible tools for self-assessment and inclusive support programmes for vulnerable communities. Number 3, partnerships for resilience. Flood risk management requires a united effort. Leeds City Council will foster dynamic partnerships with government agencies, academia, the private sector and local communities. Together, we will unlock funding, share expertise and develop transformative solutions. Our commitment to co-creation will ensure that the voices of our citizens are central to shaping a resilient Leeds. And that will lead to an overall ambition, as it says on our slide in front of us. By 2030, Leeds will stand as a model city for flood resilience with minimised flood damage, a thriving ecosystem and communities confident in their safety. The Council will lead by example, ensuring all actions align with our broader climate and sustainability objectives. Leeds City Council is ready to tackle the challenges of today and tomorrow, securing a future where floods no longer define the city's narrative, but demonstrate its resilience, adaptability and ambition. Together, we will build a safer, stronger and more sustainable Leeds. That's the end of the slides.
Thank you. So thank you to Mark and Andrew and Rachel. Before I open it up to questions, is there anything you wanted to add, Jonathan?
Yes, if that's okay. Just to say, we've sort of summed it up within our ambition as part of that sort of draft proposal document. So I suppose the pitch today to this committee is that we're at an early stage with our refresh of a strategy. The guidance that local authorities are given comes via DEFRA through the Environment Agency. That's been refreshed in the last few years, but it does still very much paint a picture of around almost, we feel, still quite a separate sort of siloed approach to doing a local flood risk management strategy. They are still promoting a sort of quite rigid structure to a document. We feel when we've done some recent workshops with different services in the council and also working with our consultants, we've looked at what other people have done around the country. Our current strategy actually is compliant. We could leave it where it is, and technically, from a statutory point of view, we have to have a local flood risk management strategy, and it would be compliant, but we don't think it's what we need. And so I suppose that you're seeing sort of some of our early thinking today in terms of what we think is possible, but also linking to some of the other items that Rachel and Andrew have gone through. There are opportunities to think much more broadly than just flood risk in isolation and do flood risk management schemes. Actually, there are lots of interventions that we think we could set out in a strategy then, and that strategy would be something that tries to branch out into different policies across the council so that we've not got separate policies for separate things, and that the outcome would be a city that's moved in a direction of travel and provides multiple benefits rather than sort of single issue things. So that's the big shift, and I think lots of council policies have gone in that direction in recent years, and we're trying to move with that as well. But we do think that there's a lot to do through infrastructure changes that have multiple benefits. So whether that is for air quality or whether that is about water management in the round rather than just dealing with too much water. So the principles of that are what Mark's outlined in that sort of final slide, really, that we think there are different ways that we can do things going forward to provide the council being a more climate resilient city rather than one that's just got a flood risk strategy that ticks a box.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody, for your presentation. So lots for us to think about there. So in terms of our recommendations, so we've been asked to discuss and consider key elements of climate adaptation that can form part of future strategies within Leeds. So that links really well to what Jonathan's just finished on. So I guess that's what I'd really like people to think about when you're thinking of questions you'd like to ask. So, you know, what are we doing? What do you think of what you've heard that we're doing? What do you think of plans for future work? Is what we're doing good enough, or as Jonathan said, is there an opportunity to be more ambitious and that kind of thing? So let me open up. I'll start with Councillor Blackburn, Councillor Anderson, and then we'll go to Councillor Rontree.
I think you've got to be ambitious. I think you've got to go beyond, because the fact is we don't know where we're going to end up. There are certain things we do know that we've done as a species to this planet that we know we can't turn round in the short term, but clearly we're not sure what's going to happen in the near future. So at all times what we've got to be is ambitious, but also be quick on the foot when things change, as they have done over probably the last 30-40 years. I'm just interested about when you were talking about this sort of menu thing, when it says about the environmental effects of what you're eating on Temple News, I think it was. And I'd like to know a little bit more about that, because the thing is I mean, are we just talking about how much CO2 is produced by producing that food? You know, I had a banana today. Quite obviously, it's come from Belize at Windward Island, and it's got to get here. But are we taking into consideration the methane produced by any beef or any ruminants we might eat or anything like that? We'll go for this.
Thank you. Can I just jump in on that as well, because that was one of my questions. So just so that I can get that ticked off, one of my questions specifically about the Temple News and work was, have you had any feedback from people who've come and used the cafe? So perhaps whoever's going to deal with that could deal with both of those. Andrew, did you want to pick up on that one?
Yeah, thank you. I think the food strategy specifically says we will dip our toe in communicating the CO2 emissions linked to food cooked from scratch. I think there is certainly more we can do when we've learnt a bit more and got more feedback. We've amended the landing page at Temple Newson Tea Rooms. We've amended the Leeds Food Strategy web page on the council's website. I'm not aware of an awful lot of feedback around that. It is only 2 items, I think, on the menu, and the insert that you saw, I think, is it's either an additional insert or it's something that goes on the back of the menu, so that if we do get loads of feedback, we can change and we can provide some more information. I think the thing that we were concerned about in the food strategy was avoiding. I'm thinking particularly avoiding information overload, where you end up with information not just about CO2, but about fair trade, but about other measures, and actually the message is lost a little bit there. What I think we will end up with will be a hybrid carbon a measure where we talk about the things that are the highest CO2 and the things that actually people might be surprised are lower. But at the same time, we're talking about, I think on the menu at Temple Newson, we talk about rare breeds, we talk about locally sourced food, we talk about the other things that the council's doing as well in terms of the provenance of its supply chain, we're probably sharing the message quite briefly and asking people, do you want to know a bit more, rather than sharing loads and loads and then people just get turned off and think, oh, I just came to a tea room, I didn't want a lecture. Maybe the role for this committee, particularly, one of the things we want to do is to try and unpick some of those myths or rumours about which are the items that specifically contribute to higher levels of CO2, but also things like food waste as well. We're less than a year away from the council looking at specific food waste as well. So there's a risk in only focusing on one part, which is where your food comes from or what CO2 is, and neglecting, exactly as Rachel said, around the scope 3, what happens downstream. So if you've got a very lofty healthy menu, but people aren't eating it, or the food's thrown away, you're actually kidding yourself that is sustainable. So I'd absolutely agree that there's a wider picture. What I think we need to do is to adjust that bandwidth with the feedback we get, and I think it's possibly only been about 6 weeks, Polly, I think, since we had the menu at Temple Newson, so it was very much spring summer 2025. If we think about the first 10 or 15 comments we get, I think we might have a better view. We did do some consultation on food in cafes as part of the preparation for the food strategy, and there was a big appetite. Oh, sorry, no pun intended again. There was a big interest in people wanting to know a little bit more about food and about menus at cafes and so on. So it's something where we do know that people are interested in that, but I don't think they would thank us if we plastered everything over the menus and they couldn't actually see what the food items were. So there's very much a balancing point there. In terms of the specifics around the measures and the food strategy, we've started with carbon calculations. We've got this freeware carbon calculator. It will not provide us with a CO2e equivalent for absolutely everything, and we will need to complement that with other sources that we've got. So particularly that, I think we'll need to disclose that when it comes to that, where we get our calculations from and how we do that. And that's certainly part of what we've tried to do so far. But that's very much about food cooked from scratch. What we want to do as well is to push our food suppliers on disclosing to us their carbon emissions, their scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions as well. We'd like to do that in the next procurement rounds around food procurement that the council has.
Thank you. I'm going to give you an opportunity to come back if you like, but I'm going to bring Polly in first.
Just a couple of additional points. So before we got to the point of doing anything with the menu, we actually had a PhD student who did some research and did some customer interaction to see what they wanted, as well as the additional public health research that happened. And one thing I was just going to maybe make a suggestion, is it something that maybe the working group would like to look at in terms of comms and engagement? So just having a look at what's been done so far and seeing how it lands from your own personal perspective, and if there's any improvements that can be made. And I think in terms of that methane point, it's CO2 equivalent, so it does pick up the whole story.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Polly. Did you want to come back, Councillor Blackburn?
I appreciate what you're saying about scaring people away. I mean, too much information, it can be as bad as no information at all. Well, wish you success in what you're doing there, and hopefully we can possibly change people's habits a little bit.
Thank you. Okay, next on my list was Councillor Anderson.
Just a couple of points. One is, we're going through a review of our local plan just now. What suggestions have you put in for saving some agricultural land and getting it removed, period? Now, no ifs, no buts, no maybes. We need this for food production in the city, and that should be our priority before it goes for either commercial use or for housing. Because once it's gone, and we're no longer then able to source our food locally. So what have we done about that? And secondly, on your carbon footprint and also your air quality, in the north of the city, it's coming to an absolute standstill now because of the council deciding to dig roads up, put in cycle lanes all over the place. In your area, going in through Meanwood, there's a bend now that it's just almost impossible to get through. So I've stopped going that route. Coming in through Headingley. So how much is that adding to our carbon footprint? And how much is that damaging our air quality? Because when HGVs are bringing food in and out, they're stop-start. So it's the law of unintended consequences. The council put the cycle lanes in for the best of reasons, and I'm not criticising them for that, but it's the law of unintended consequences. Because they've done A, it's causing B and C now as a result of it.
Thank you. Did you want to make a start on that one, Polly or Andrew? Polly.
I'll come in just on the air quality one. I think across the city we monitor in multiple places and we've not seen anywhere where it's going up, air quality is improving. So that is the general trend, and part of that will be the improvement of vehicles and things. So it wouldn't be as granular as to say at a specific junction, but even with stopping and starting, you know, the technology's changed with stop-start where engines shut off. So I don't think you would see an increase, and we're seeing a reduction in transport emissions in terms of our overall carbon footprint. So
I would suggest you speak to the Road Holiday Association and they would give you contrary evidence.
Well, if are they doing air quality monitoring then? They've certainly not shared
they're
that.
Always complaining about what can I do in my ward to stop-start their vehicles stop starting, because every time they brake there is a problem with all the load that's behind it. It moves forward, so they've got to put the brakes on harder, which leaves rubber behind. Whether you know, they need to get. I think we are. One of the problems I'm having is that people say, well, why is nobody listening to the consultation? Well, the people we use in Leeds for our consultation have a particular bent as to what they're trying to prove, and their consultation is always skewed in that way, and they don't take into consideration the evidence that would be available from other parties that have a contrary opinion. Now, even when it comes to bus franchising, that's going to have the more buses we get on the road network, the more the cars and the HGVs that are transferring goods are going to be affected by that, because you're going to have, at the moment, you might have one bus every 20 minutes going through your area if you're really lucky. It could be down to one, you know, 2 buses in that period could be coming up, which just leads to go down to Oxford Street in London and you'll see how increase in public transport leads to a backing up, and HGVs really do cause a problem. But anyway, well, I don't think we're going to agree on that one, but it is a real problem. And in my village of Poole, you know, that is still a major problem, air quality along there, with the vehicle. The cars are moving okay now. The cars are beginning to move okay, but it's the volume of HGVs and the size of the HGVs that are coming in from the continent that are causing the problem. Not necessarily British, it's the continental large Pantechnians that are coming through a narrow road with houses either side, so there's no place for the air to go.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to come in on that one? Andrew?
Yeah, just a little bit, and I'll link in a little bit to what Jonathan and Mark said as well. So air quality management areas, Councillor Anderson, you're absolutely right. Pooling Wharfdale is the only part of Leeds where we have NO2, particularly above 30 grams per cubic metre in terms of NO2. 2 years ago we had 6 areas. So as Polly said, the air quality is improving at those monitoring locations. I think in terms of maybe taking away the conversation there, one of the things I think we can do is we've got the influence in travel behaviour, looking at modal shift, and I think particularly cycle lanes, increased use of public transport, more walking, and so on, that there are a whole range of pros and cons around that. And at the moment, in terms of the overall position of the city, people are seeing the benefits, but that doesn't mean that consultations won't show people who have, who've got a range of opinions. So we can share maybe a bit more. But what we've got in terms of our air quality action plan is very much as Mark, I think you said, we've been given a template from central government which doesn't quite meet what works in Leeds, so we're going to try and add to that template to make sure it reflects what's important in Leeds as well. And I think, as I've said already, the air quality impacts. We're aware that transport remains the single largest source of air quality problems, but as Polly said, the NO2 and particulate emissions are lower than they are in other towns and cities, and particularly for us, we're looking at domestic, indoor. We're looking at other sources of air quality problems as well, and we're following the data in terms of where then people are reporting those health problems. So what we might end up with is something that's very much more about particular pockets and particular locations, whether that's to do with locations in your constituency or locations in certain parts of the city. And that might mean we need more sensors and locations, or we need more discussion then about what's happening at those locations. I've had presented to Climate Action Horsforth, and as you can imagine, the focus there would be around the airport and so on. So you can't get away from those sort of local considerations in certain parts of the city. Just going back to your first point on the Leeds City Plan and the land use. So particularly there, we're in regular discussion with the people developing the City Plan 2040. Food and land is mentioned a lot of times, including engagement with the agricultural sector and farmers. What we've called in the food strategy, we've moved from farmers to growers, particularly there. So that might indicate maybe smaller scale there in terms of that. But that's something that we can follow. I think we can follow up with the planning team as well to talk about exactly how land use is reflected around agricultural land, or the potential for agricultural land. And I absolutely agree with you that when the city's looking at land use, agricultural land will have to be considered alongside use for housing or for other developments as well.
There is allotments. If we could set aside some of those sites for allotments, that would then, local people would then be able to grow things more. And it might be better to have allotments rather than housing in some of those locations.
Thank you. Did anybody want to come in on that specific points? Polly?
Just to say, we're looking to do our allotment plan this year to see, because there are areas where we don't have waiting lists and then there are areas where we do, so just looking to see where that need is. So we'll obviously work with planning about that as well.
Thank you. I was just going to ask Councillor Rafiq, because Councillor Rafiq indicated wanting to come in on Councillor Anderson's report. Councillor Ray does too. So I'm just going to let you two jump the queue if that's all right. So we'll go to Councillor Rafiq first.
I'm not sure. Yeah, it's on now. I can't see it because... no, I mean, I do get your concerns, Councillor Anderson, about the bus lanes and cycle lanes, and obviously and the roadworks that goes on. But I think it's probably, to be fair to Polly and Andrew and the team here, it's you know, although we will report back to colleagues in highways and transport, but it is probably a one item, I think, for scrutiny to, you know, the Infrastructure and Transport Scrutiny Committee to, you know, to look at that, those concerns. I also do know, because of the current works going on closer to my ward and within my ward, that the ward members are always consulted whenever there's any bus lanes or cycle lanes are going through. And the issue on Brownlee Road, for instance, has been kind of with the relevant wards being consulted. And there are, I mean, obviously, instead of having all-day bus lanes or 24 hours, you'll see that it's just in the morning or peak times, which actually reduces that effect. So there are ways we can contribute, but I'm just saying that probably this isn't probably the forum. Although I think we'll need to feedback what you said. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Councillor Ray in because you had a specific interest in coming in on this point.
Thank you. It's just about local food growing, and I'm involved with Kirkstall Valley Farm. And I wonder, are you talking to small organisations like Meanwood, Swillington and Kirkstall Valley Farm, who are local growers, who are, to my knowledge, managing to pull crops off that is far greater than sort of mass in agriculture, to see about the sort of areas and the sort of farming that can be done that can increase food production. So currently, Kirkstall Valley Farm is doing about 130 veg boxes a week from a relatively small area.
The answer is yes. We had a half day or 3/4 of a day on what's called urban agroecology, which I think is what the university calls small-scale growing, but for businesses, not necessarily for volunteers. Absolutely to discuss that. We had presentations from both Meanwood and Kirkstall there. I think we're looking at an action plan to try and grow that across the city and learning from cities like Bristol that just appear to maybe have something maybe a little bit more resilient, what they call land matching. So a way of I'm going to call it blind dating, but a way to match up, if you like, wants and offers, which may well link in then to how we use land. So we think we can learn from other places as well, but also want to get the story out of what those organisations are already doing. But to be clear, that's a sort of semi-commercial, small business, start-up, scale-up, not necessarily individuals at an allotment growing their own. So it's something where I think we need a measured type approach. But yes, that's taking place, Councillor, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to Councillor Anderson, if you'd like to come in on any of the points you raised, or are you happy with what's been said?
The point I'd make is that the city isn't just the city centre. There is a rural aspect and a suburban and a semi-rural aspect, and you need different policies. And I don't think the council is developing a range of policies for all those areas. Quite rightly, the vast majority of people probably live in the city centre. Also, the most development in terms of volume is going to occur in the inner areas, and I'm not disputing that, because if they didn't take it, then the outer areas would have to take an even greater share. So I'm pleased with that, but we've got to think of what's the effect of it. That connectivity is a problem, and getting access to things is a problem as well. So you need to look at that. And when it comes to food, where the food is actually been taken from and to, it all comes together in terms of the effect it has. And we need to get the local plan. It comes back to the local plan. If we don't get the local plan right, we are condemning this city. I mean, Councillor Blackburn was talking about that there is a possibility that some of the allotment site in Kirkstall could be coming forward for development. Well, why take away good land? Because we're absolutely short of it. Who in their right mind brought it forward in the first place? You know, that should have just been taken out day one. No, we're not going to do that. The greater priority is the green agenda to fit in with the climate change, not growth for the sake of growth, which will end up damaging the city. If we continue to grow the way we're going, we're not going to have the mitigation and adaptation possibilities, because we're not asking developers to put those in. So we're going to make ourselves worse over time, despite the positive images that were put up earlier on.
Thank you. Is there anything in there to come back on? No, we're good to go? Okay. Just before we do move on, I'd just like to say that I think the land matching exercise is a really important one, particularly when we look at the requests we get from communities for local growing, and the idea that we can adapt to be able to fulfil those requests, I think is a really important piece of work. So good to hear that. Okay, Councillor Rowntree is next.
Thank you, Chair. Could I start with a question, I think probably for Andrew? Glad that we got onto allotments. I think it was Councillor Anderson who mentioned it first, because that was definitely on my list. Because well-used allotments are self-evidently an environmental good, and they have other benefits sort of quite independently from sort of the environmental angle as well. I'm just wondering, how's the allotment space, the protection of allotment space, incorporated within our food strategy? I would have thought that that's sort of something that we need to sort of be specifically mentioning. I'm pleased to hear a reference to growers rather than farmers, and the emphasis on the small scale. My colleague has already mentioned Kirkstall Valley Farm, and I think one of the object lessons from Kirkstall Valley Farm is the resilience of organisations like this, and particularly a couple of years ago, some very severe flooding in February, and they took a hit and they were able to work around it and keep the operation going with actually only a few days disruption, which I thought was extraordinary. And there's a really good case study in how to use land on a floodplain and what you can do in those circumstances. Thanks. Yeah, if you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, Councillor. Allotment space is probably mentioned more in the action plan for the strategy rather than in the text of the sort of introduction to the strategy. We've got something like 32 actions for the strategy, and I would say 2 or 3 would touch on green spaces that the council manages one way or another. So we have a dotted line link from the strategy to the green spaces allotment forum officer. I'm just checking you can still hear me. Yeah. So yes, we're talking to allotment users, which is part of the green spaces forums. I think in terms of the forward plan and sort of what Polly's already mentioned around the allotment plan, there will be an aim to look at that and see how either how those allotments are already used or whether we would want to look at doing something differently. One of the areas that I've heard about was whether the current space of allotment is the right size, and whether that size could be changed. There's been suggestion around having the engagement to look at the scale of plot on the allotments. I'll share with you the link to the action plan. So the action plan is only one click away from the food strategy that we've put up on the slide, so you can see there. But I think allotments themselves are mentioned, not just food growers who happen to be using allotments.
Thank you. Did you want any comments on your floodplain use question? So I don't know if anybody wants to pick up on that. Kind of, was it specifically about the use of land in that kind of zone?
In that context, I was thinking specifically of the farm as an example of an organisation that can deal with like challenges of that kind. I mean, I should possibly have declared a historic interest when I started. I did until a couple of years ago actually have a job working for the organisation. Although it's somewhat in the past now, but I do think it's worth stressing that there are sort of land that is marginal in that kind of way, and it's important that we make the most of these opportunities and things don't get sort of pushed into the too difficult category. Thanks. would like to pose a question about emissions, if that's okay. If we can move on that. Yeah, thank you. And this was where you were saying about scope 3, Rachel, and I know the difficulties of quantifying and counting these things are self-evident. It occurs to me, though, that what's a scope 3 emission for something that the council is doing is a scope 1 emission for somebody else somewhere. And it's a direct result of their activities, even if it's not something that we've got vision. And I'm just wondering sort of what's possibilities there are for sharing that kind of information and getting hold of that kind of data, because I think it's important, isn't it, that scope 3 emissions inform the decision that the council takes, and certainly in planning considerations, for example, if you're building a new primary school, school run emissions should be part of the calculation as to where you put it, and that's something that is difficult for us to get a handle on. Can you say a bit about how you think what we've got sort of numeric wise and what we could get, and how that can feed into planning decisions, please?
So in terms of scope 3, I'll give a couple of examples. So probably might have been 2 or 3 years we did all the food that we use as a council and did the scope 3 emissions of that, and that was a really arduous exercise because basically we had to use the invoices that had come in, look at the data, look at standards. So it was still, would never have been 100% accurate. There's government data for certain food products. Things like water, for example, you can get things like the transmission of that water from the water industry. So there's bits that you can get more easily. Business travel, you can get more easily. But if you took, for example, let's take, for example, our district heating supply, just as an easy one. I could easily ask our district heating supplier for their scope 1 and 2 emissions in terms of the vehicles they use, the buildings that they heat. But actually their construction and what they do on site is much more tricky to quantify. So because most people don't quantify the product, so you end up, the amount of data that you have to go through to get there becomes overly onerous. The university has done an exercise which kind of gives us a bit of a guide in terms of scope 3 emissions for the city, but it will look at how much does the city spend on food, how much does it spend on construction, and it does quite a sort of academic exercise in terms of trying to map that out, but it gives us a bit of a feel, and that's how you get to the statistic where we say actually most organisations, 95% of their emissions sit within scope 3, not scope 1 and 2. But like you say, if every organisation we work with deals with their scope 1 and 2, that starts to help address our scope 3. I don't know if highways colleagues might like to say something, because they have done some work on scope 3 on some of their specific projects. So I don't want to drop them in it, but you've tried to do that exercise on specific contracts, but it's not easy, but they have made some progress.
Did anybody want to comment on that?
I can try. We've started to do through bigger projects. It is a little bit easier in some respects in that you can tie that into the procurement exercise. So for a specific infrastructure delivery project, you can actually task the supplier with providing that sort of deeper dive into their supply chain, and then they pass that on to their suppliers through their procurement exercises. I think we've still got a way to go. Some of the work that Mark's leading for us in highways is to look across the board and see how do we start to build that information together for things that are not big projects, where actually you're building the cost into doing that assessment within the project. To do it as part of the day job, as Polly said, it is an extensive exercise, and the principle that our scope 3 emissions should be sat on somebody else's desktop somewhere is the right question to ask, isn't it? And I think we probably do need to just continue to do what we can, at least through procurement exercises, to make sure that that's built into the ask. You can supply us with a product, but can you also provide us with the data that goes with your product? Therefore, we build a fuller picture of what we're dealing with. I think there's been some really good work on that in terms of supply chain, and all three of us actually, including Polly, are also working with Leeds Climate Commission, and one of the projects there is about supply chain, and looking at how do we tackle sort of getting a better understanding of the carbon footprint of people's supply chains, but then also just using tools and techniques to try and build that into the ask. So I think that's sort of who's doing that well, how do we share that learning, how do we give people information so that becomes quite just a standard ask as part of a procurement exercise. So I think there'll be some good products come out of that work as well, but that's quite early days, as is the work in highways at the moment. But there's that information should be there, we're just probably not asking for it as standard.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on any of those?
Thank you. Yeah, that's... Oh. Okay, thanks. That was encouraging, I think. I'm hoping that you'd agree that the sort of database behind all of this is becoming more mature, and over time, it's people's approach to quantifying emissions is getting more sophisticated, and it's easier to ask for and receive this information. I'm always aware of the sort of danger of running into sort of putting these questions to a private business and getting, oh, no, I'm very sorry, that's commercially confidential, and that kind of approach. But do you think it is getting easier and as time goes?
Andrew?
I think it's getting easier. So I mentioned the sort of hybrid approach to carbon calculations that we're looking at for food, and we're doing very much the same with the Leeds Anchors network. So alongside the work on supply chains with the aim to get information out, I think in large part it's about trying to get small businesses up to the same position of readiness as the larger businesses that would have a sustainability team or a sustainability officer. So we're looking at a hybrid approach there to understanding carbon emissions. So that might be complementing what we already do in terms of the carbon disclosure for Scope 1 and Scope 2, and using the measures for activity. And I think activity is spend is the replacement we use for activity, and to use the categories then for carbon emissions. So we're looking at whether we can reuse the CO2 emissions that the universities and the college use for areas of activity, and see how they would apply to our spend. And I think linked to that discussion around the university, there's been a discussion around the sort of top 300 suppliers by spend from public sector institutions in Leeds, and seeing if we could put that spend under the microscope. It's still going to be a very broad approach there in terms of category, and you could have a category of something that's not very healthy food and a category of something that's healthy food. They're going to get the same CO2 calculation because it's the same pound that you've spent. So it's always going to be a very broad measure, but I think that's the starting point then, to being curious and then asking one more question. I think the one thing I would add there, I think Jonathan and I were in a session where we had a local food grower, a local farmer. I wanted to be on the preferred suppliers list for the NHS in Leeds, and I think he gave up just doing the modern slavery statement for the NHS, which I think was 17 pages that he had to fill, and he just wanted to sell peas to the NHS in Leeds. So we just need to be aware, I think, about how many questions we get and try and get that the right size. So it's something where I think we can have lots and lots of questions, and we might need to then choose the sorts of questions that we ask of our potential suppliers. But that hybrid model would be a really useful way forward of getting everybody up to the same point and understanding that in a broad way, but also a way that we share the same sort of calculations in common.
Thank you for the question and those answers. So I've got Councillor Harrington on my list now.
I'm sure Polly knows what I'm going to ask. It's about emissions. We have several residents in our area who are particularly keen on their perception that there is a major lack of monitoring in the outer areas, and particularly a market town like Wetherby, which is at the confluence of 2 motorways, and we have an awful lot of HGV traffic. They are also particularly concerned about, because we live in the outer area and people are perceived to be more wealthy and maybe can afford to buy electric vehicles, they're very concerned about the particulates that come from car tyres of electric vehicles, because they're heavier, so when they're braking they're actually causing more emission with the particulates. And now there's several people who are asking us questions now about how are we going to be proactive in monitoring that, rather than waiting until we absolutely have to, because the government decides that they're going to change, their criteria. So that's the first point about how can we actually advertise to people where the monitoring appliances actually are in the outer areas, and particularly in the market towns. Thinking about Wetherby, even think about Guys, you think about Otley, those places are going to have that kind of level of HGV and possibly more electric vehicles. And then the other thing I'd just like to say, I'd like to thank Jonathan for the work that he's been doing about the flood risk alleviation in Wetherby, and I know that I'm keen to take that forward, Jonathan, see how we're getting on with the monitoring and the equipment that was put into the Wilderness car park area. Thank you.
Thank you. So shall we do the air quality one first? Did you want to come in on that one, Polly?
In terms of where they're monitored, everything is set out in the annual status report that we have a legal obligation to publish every year. I was just quickly trying to find the link to it to have a look at where we're up to in terms of Wetherby, in terms of latest locations. And I know when we've had previous conversations, there has always been historic monitoring and things. In terms of additional monitoring, I don't think there is any intention, but I'm just going to defer to Andrew because he's probably more up to speed than me on it. So.
No, happy to do that, Polly. We had two queries last week from residents, constituents in Wetherby, saying they didn't think there was any particulate monitoring in Wetherby, and I think that's not the case. We've got a particulate monitor in Wetherby. The council's approach to air quality has always mentioned particulates, and there's 2 different types of particulates as well, irrespective of the sources of those. I guess it's a bit like the discussion between petrol and diesel vehicles, where petrol vehicles emit CO2, diesel vehicles emit NO2. They're both greenhouse gases. They're both part of that greenhouse gas protocol there. I think particularly in terms of the discussion about how we monitor and where the monitoring station, I think I mentioned particularly there, I looked when I got the query through on Thursday or Friday last week, and I've made contact with our colleagues in Highways as well to say how well do we communicate where the sensors are, and particularly when we tell people maybe exactly where they are. So it's in the wrong place. That was where the problem was 5 years ago. Can you move it, or can we have another one? Specifically, the council has in place, or the city has in place, provided by the university, provided by others. They are different sensors for NO2 and for particulates, and arguably they're on 2 different maps, and the maps are brought together, as Polly says, for the annual air quality status report. So we do monitor particulates. The purple air is the specific sort of crowd-funded. So the university and others say, well, if you want one, they're £250, you can get them done. They have a SIM card, we can get them to report. So there's ways to do that. I do know that for some planning developments, we've been able to insert an air quality monitoring approach to planning developments as well around that. So I think your point on how can we advertise, I'll make sure I've got something there and try and keep it as visual as we can as well. And also, I think particularly if we've got queries talking about air quality, I'll also be talking to my colleagues in environmental health and in highways to say, well, what happens if we do get a monitor and the monitor says on the occasion when the sensors show red, what do we do? As Polly said, for most of the time, for most of the day, for most of the year, the sensors are not. And the example that we'll have from the university is things like bonfire night, where we suddenly have sensors showing red for a short period everywhere for a very short period. You know, a generation ago that would have been the case across the whole of the city. So for us particularly, I think we just need to talk then about that. Well, what happens then when we do get those, those adverse results? How do we respond to that?
Thank you. Before I move over to Jonathan, did you want to come in on that one? Just something that just struck me, Andrew, is that something that we can ask as a planning condition? I don't know if anybody else knows that, but you know, to have an air quality monitor fitted as part of the conditions we ask of developers.
I've never seen it mentioned in any planning reports.
No, me neither. I just wondered whether we can ask for that. Right, I'll look out for that.
I seem to remember on a development on Cherwell Hill that we had that report, because that was the main issue of it. It were whether it were going to increase the amount of traffic and produce air quality and reduce air quality. I think we've done that. We've done that once on an application.
Okay, that's interesting. That's certainly something for us, you know, that those of us who sit on planning panels to have a look out for. Okay, so the second question was about flood work in Wetherby. Did you want to pick that one up, Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So there's probably a few things to mention here. So there's we've been working on modelling for the full catchment on the wharf, which I think there's a double-sided sort of answer to this. One is that it hasn't shown that there's a massive driver for a big flood alleviation scheme on other parts of the wharf, particularly around places like Wetherby and Boston Spa. What it has shown is that the standard of protection that's already there from the existing assets is better than we thought. That also means that we've got a better baseline model for planning decisions and things like that. So both largely from understanding river risk, but it fits very nicely, and that information has been fed into the National Flood Risk Assessment that the Environment Agency has just released. We've also done quite an extensive check of what they've produced for surface water flooding. So the Environment Agency did the audit on river-based and coastal flooding. Local authorities were asked if they wanted to engage with the sort of consultation and the audit of surface water risk, and we said we absolutely did want to do that. And we've put quite a lot of energy and time into working with the Environment Agency and Jacobs, who were their consultants on NAFRA 2, to sort of audit what their mapping was showing and provide as much data as we had from local incidents and things like that. So the flooding in Wetherby and Boston Spa recently is a good example of where we've ensured that the sort of incident data that we've gathered goes into that assessment. So even though the Environment Agency have released, you know, it's a long time since they've done an update to the national mapping for flood risk, but what they've now got is a more interactive process, so we can go to them with a query and say, we think the risk here is different to what it says on your maps. We've actually had a number of residents come forward as well and say, I think the risk that your national mapping is showing Environment Agency is different, but the local authority has to support that application to the Environment Agency. Not many residents have probably got the resources to get an engineer to come out and remodel their risk, but we try and support that as much as we can in terms of like the data that we hold for incidents. On the things that we're doing around the wharf at Wetherby and the Wilderness Car Park, so that's one of the very few designated inland bathing waters in the country, and it's now a sort of up and running bathing water site. It was designated last year, but actually they couldn't classify it until this bathing water season, so it runs from May to October. So we've recently had to install signs as the local authority to ensure that people are aware that the water quality is classed as poor at that location. And it also puts more requirements on the the water company and the Environment Agency to monitor that all the time. So they're both looking at different ways to monitor it, but the Environment Agency currently do physical on-site water sampling every week. So that information is being gathered as part of what we do. What we're looking at doing is implementing a procedure, which would mean that if there was a pollution incident at that location, we would be responsible. There's various teams play into this because it's a green spaces managed site, it's a car park, and it's also on the side of a river. So we're just looking at the moment at a sort of cross-service approach to making sure that the public would be warned about the risk of a pollution incident there. And then the final thing to say is that we're also engaging with Yorkshire Water about their combined sewer overflow programme, and as much as that is about reducing the number of spills from combined sewer overflows and therefore that impacts on water quality, there are potentially going forward, going back to what Mark has presented, we're really pushing hard with them that our strategy would drive a more holistic approach where we look at reducing the amount of runoff from land and from roads and from infrastructure that goes into the combined system in the first place. So rather than just trying to store combined sewer water in tanks and in storage tunnels and pipes like we saw on the Thames Tideway, actually we would be trying to help Yorkshire Water to manage that at source. So particularly actually the Meanwood catchment is a catchment that we're investing in terms of trying to sort of promote an approach similar to the slide that we showed in Mansfield, where you would look at managing surface water runoff in lots and lots of places rather than doing one solution somewhere. And we're trying to really work with Yorkshire Water to promote that approach as well, so that we're not just solving the problem at the point of risk, we're solving problems by dealing with the source of the issue. And that would absolutely be appropriate for places like Wetherby and other places, but certainly the approach we're going to take in the Meanwood catchment will follow that approach, and Yorkshire Water are working with us as part of the project team on that.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. Did you want to come back on any of those, Councillor? Okay, so that, I think, is everybody I had on my list. Councillor Rowntree wanting to come in. If anybody else wants to indicate, please put a hand up.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to touch on the flood management strategy side, if I may. I didn't know. Mark and Jonathan, just first to say thanks to the time you've given to my colleagues and myself over the years about issues in our ward. I know we've all met several times. I have a sort of question, particularly about the air. I'm just wondering, post all the FAS work, are there any checkpoints that we can look to over the winter, stats that will enable us to know that FAS has made a positive difference? I appreciate it's designed to deal with infrequent floods, and we wouldn't be faced with that kind of flood every year regardless. But just in terms of stats, is there anything that we can look at that would help us to know that it's doing the business? Thank you.
Thank you. Who's going to pick that one up?
I think the most obvious sort of publicly available data would be where we've got access to Environment Agency online river level data. What it won't do, I suppose, is give a clear indication of what hasn't flooded. But then what we would have is, I suppose, we should start to see a big reduction in the number of flood incidents that are recorded in the areas that are at risk from the FAS, in the area that's now protected by Leeds FAS. So equivalent river levels at gauges like Kirkstall or further upstream at Appley Bridge or at Armley. So what we should see as well is that particularly a site like Armley, that is a gauge that's been in for a long time, that's located just near Viaduct Road, down off Kirkstall Road. That site is used by the Environment Agency to trigger flood alerts and flood warnings, specifically more flood warnings that would say we're issuing a warning now because we expect flooding to happen. Now, obviously, the trigger for that will need to be revised, and actually the Environment Agency have been working with Mark and the team around revising the modelling now that the scheme's done. It's not as quick as process as we would like. The scheme is complete and it's operational, and therefore we'd sort of ideally we would see an instant change. But they would be indications that you would see that the equivalent river level that caused major flooding in 2015 should be a level where actually we see very, very little, if any, impacts on that corridor. You might see impacts in other parts of the city which we've not been able to protect yet. But what you should also see is a reduction in the number of flood warnings issued by the Environment Agency in that area, because they shouldn't need to do that because flooding is not expected. One of the things that we haven't necessarily brought in, but one of the capabilities that we're developing because of the way that we manage the scheme, is because it's got lots of active defences. We maybe need to consider whether some of that information could be made more public in terms of, so we've got systems that we can see in the background that tell us exactly what's happening on all parts of the scheme at the moment. Some of that's very detailed technical information around pressures in the bladders under the weirs in the city centre, or it's this hydraulic pressures that are on the gates that we've just installed at Carverley. But there could be some other information, I think, that would give a sense check of like what bits of the scheme are actually working, you know, and which bits, which walls are wet and therefore protecting people, or which assets have been closed and therefore they're preventing water going to certain places. So that isn't something that we do have available publicly, but I think it's something in time that I think we could give a more confident picture of how the scheme's working behind the scenes, because if we do our job properly, you shouldn't really see what's happened. You know, we've had people on standby this weekend and they've been working behind the scenes with Highways colleagues and the Environment Agency, and that's all happens behind the scenes. The scheme in the city centre is working all the time, so people have been tending to that scheme all through this dry period, but that means because we've actually got the flip side in the last few months where if the weirs were to have an issue and the river levels dropped in the city centre, we'd actually have more of an environmental issue because the river levels have been quite low. It's very sensitive to that. But the scheme needs to be in place to allow navigation to happen all the time, and therefore we need to be able to respond to that. So I think there are things we could do better that would maybe mean that some of that information that our duty officers got behind the scenes, we could make that more available, just to say this is what it is doing behind the scenes, but thankfully you don't see that because flooding's not happening when it would have done in the past.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on any of that, Councillor Rondry?
Thanks, that's very helpful, Jonathan. I'm thinking about the gauge at Armley. Now, I would guess that that will provide a warning if there is, obviously we hope it won't, but it would provide a warning if there's a risk of the flooding in the city centre, in the nature of things. Is there a sort of similar site upstream in perhaps Rodley, that kind of area that my colleagues and I ought to be sort of taking an interest in terms of the perspective for Kirkstall? So it's upstream from us there.
Yeah, I think we could provide a bit of an indication on where the gauges are. So some of the sites that we've actually installed, so Mark's work on Leeds Fast 2, we've installed extra gauges. So there are now gauges that we've installed brand new at Carverley at the flood storage area itself. So we use that the gates that provide the flood storage area at Carverley actually are automatically operated from river level, so they're triggered by that. We have to be on site and we have to manage that asset physically as well, but actually the sort of the brain that runs the machine is actually triggered directly from the new gauges that we've put in at Carverley Footbridge, which is sort of closer to Rodley. That information will be available online and you'll be able to see that. I think the thing that we could do to accompany that might be to provide some insight into what key levels would be useful for you to monitor. So there's a gauge at Kirkstall as well, and there's a gauge at Appley Bridge further up, and there's some in Bradford that actually would give you an indication of at levels like this we would see this impact in the city. I think we could provide maybe some interpretation that might be useful.
Fantastic, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ray.
You can actually sign up for flood alerts, Andy, off the .gov site, so all of us at the farm have those. And historically they've been really accurate, but guessing what you've been saying is relevant because last spring, not the one just gone, there were a lot of potential flooding alerts, and it never happened, and there was a lot of water. Now, I think I've mentioned to you before, was that just good luck, or was it part of the flood management? And you actually said you thought it was possibly a bit of good luck, really. But certainly the river isn't getting to the excessive levels that we've seen historically at the farm. So it is, but it is really useful to be able to use that. So if it can be updated, it would be really helpful for us as an organisation. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I can just come in on that point as well, I know that flood alerts went out this weekend, didn't they, for Meanwood and I certainly got one for the Whitebeck. Was there anything that occurred after the warnings went out this weekend?
Checked in with the duty officer this morning, actually, and not yet, but sometimes that's not unusual. If we've, I am aware there was a highway flooding issue where I think a combined sewer had been surcharged and damaged a section of road, which is sort of what we had last May. If you remember, we had quite torrential thunderstorms last bank holiday May in 2024. So I'll need to find out some more details on that. I don't think we have, but on your point about the alerts, the challenge the Environment Agency have in terms of providing flood alerts, which are flooding is possible, are that they have to be in a timely manner. So they have to be upfront and they have to be done on forecasts. And for this time of year when the forecast is very difficult to pin down, and for catchments like Meanwood and for the Whitebeck, which is they're extremely fast reacting catchments, they quite often does mean that the alert can be a little bit like the crying wolf, because they are out early, because for the air, the middle air flood alert covers a huge area, and then the flood alert for lots of the fast flowing rivers like Meanwood and Whitebeck is triggered together, so actually they're not very specific to locations. Coming back to Councillor Harrington's point earlier, one of the things that we've trialled at Wetherby are flood bollards, so they are our own sensors. So going back to the network Andrew said about air quality, we are looking at more sort of smart cities technology, where over the top of what we've got on the main river network with the Environment Agency system, can we actually develop a more intelligent sort of locally triggered warning system for people? So we work with the West Yorkshire Flood Innovation Programme, so that's the 5 districts and the university and WICA and the Environment Agency and Yorkshire Water. So we've been developing projects that look at that, but Wetherby is the first site that we've actually installed the bollards, but we've a plan to put in another 5 in places that are actually more sort of flash flood, highway, local issues. So I think it would be really appropriate for some of the faster flowing catchments in the city that are affected. It is river flooding technically, but actually it's very reactive to just the rain that falls in that catchment. And at the moment, the sort of national warning system, it just isn't designed to do that sort of alerting. But for people that live there, that is something that we feel could really come through. And I think that's what the refresh strategy would really try and drive, is that how do we give real-time, good quality information? How do people understand their catchments better? How do we provide that information? And they're probably more of the schemes that we'll be developing would be about how we become smarter at doing this, rather than just building our way out of a problem, because we realise that we can't protect everywhere in the city, and actually it will be about being resilient or responsive to it and adapting to things over time, rather than big infrastructure schemes. And that's the shift we need to make.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting piece of work. As picking up on Councillor Ray's point, if flood alerts go out, I think the accuracy of them makes a difference, doesn't it? Because I think people would rather a flood alert go out and then the flooding not happen. But there's a limit to how effective that becomes over time if you're constantly receiving alerts and nothing happens. So I think, yeah, the more that we can do to be accurate about that kind of information, the better. And I also completely agree with your point about being a bit more kind of shouting about the work that FAS is doing in protecting the city, because it's an amazing piece of engineering and a huge amount of work that went into making it happen. and then it just sits there and is quiet, isn't it? And you know, people aren't aware of the difference it's making. So I agree with that as well. I think, you know, that's something that is definitely worth us looking at shouting about. Councillor Blackburn.
Just picking up on that, I think you've got a thankless job, really. I mean, all you need, I mean, I live in catchment area for Wortley Beck. Over the other side of the hill is Farnley Woodbeck. And all you need is the rain to drop 200 or 300 yards differently, and you'll get flooding in that valley rather than in this valley. And we often get flood warnings because we're expecting heavy rain, and actually it drops in the wrong place. So I think only thing you can do is actually send the thing out to people. I'd rather be told we've got chances of being flooded and not told, and then get flooded.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's probably the case for most people. Anybody else got any questions they would like to ask? Okay, can I come in with a few of mine then, please? My first one, Rachel, is it feels like we're going back a long way to your opening presentation. But my first question that I wrote down was about the heat wave checklist that you mentioned, which I think is a really important piece of work. Are we confident that they exist and are being implemented rather than just documents that people aren't referring to?
As far as we know, they are. They go out every time that we're even getting near what's not quite considered a heat wave, but if it's increased temperatures. So I'm aware that this time round, a couple of weeks ago when we had the several days of high temperatures, they are recirculated as part of the severe weather internal alerts, and with management who are responsible for that, they're recirculated and signposted to that guidance, and it is built in. Obviously there's different guidance depending on what part of the council people work in, so those who are on the front line, such as refuse workers, they've got increased items on their particular list which refer to more personal wellbeing as well. So we've had, after they were first brought in after the July 2022, we've had colleagues' feedback to say things have changed in terms of how they've dealt with their work, but we don't really have to our knowledge, all we know is that they're being recirculated and management have been told that to use this guidance, but we don't have a feedback, so that's something that we can perhaps check on. I mean, it is still being very much used, and the checklist in particular I think was more important at the start, because we have buildings such as this where we've got rooms which are potentially not suitable within the civic hall to be used during a heat wave, but then the example of Merrion House, which is predominantly air conditioned, very much can be signposted to. So once those initial checks were done, now it's more a case of the general guidance, which is sort of keeping hydrated, making sure that you're adjusting your hours accordingly depending on where you're working, and we've not had feedback to suggest that they're not being used otherwise.
Thank you, Rachel. That's good to know, because it's the kind of thing that when it's needed, it's really needed, isn't it? So it needs to be something that's there and in operation. Okay, my next one was for Mark and Jonathan, looking to the flood risk strategy update that you mentioned, and two specific things really. One about the idea of permeable water surfaces, which I think is something that's really important for us as a city. What kind of influence will we be able to have in terms of pushing developers to do a much better job of looking at that kind of infrastructure when they're putting up big projects?
I think we've been waiting on a few things to happen in the last couple of years that haven't actually been implemented yet. And one of those is there's a part of the Flood and Water Management Act that was never enacted in England, and that was Schedule 3, which was specifically around creating a SUDS approval body, so it would be a separate thing to the current planning consent process. That would mean that as a development comes forward, so they have this in Wales, it's been in for a few years. It was part of the Flood and Water Management Act, but was never brought in initially, partly due to the amount of pushback and the challenge around from the development sector. It's still not in place. DEFRA 18 months ago said we plan to implement this in the next 12 months, and we'll start a consultation. And actually, I think the change of government means that that's gone through a further review. What they have done, though, recently, and we're actually still working through the implications of this, but overall, the outcome is positive, we think, is they've actually issued national guidance on sustainable urban drainage systems, which we haven't had previously. So there's been sort of industry standard guidance, and then what we did is developed a Leeds-based set of guidelines that complement the planning regs. So it's a sort of supplementary planning guidance, specifically around SUDS. We actually shared that with West Yorkshire partners, and we sort of came up with a version that was agreed. It was actually quite pleased to say it was based on our initial guidance, and then we took some feedback from others, and then there was a sort of West Yorkshire-wide approach. The decisions that people make are taken at a local level, so they're always sort of planning authority-led. But the guidance has been fairly consistent in West Yorkshire, but it doesn't come with a great deal of teeth, and I think without having Schedule 3, it has meant that there's been a gap there in terms of technically how hard we can push back on some of these solutions. The national planning guidance that's come out around SUDS does feel like a move towards providing that strength through the planning system. We haven't had this official, but our interpretation of that move feels like what we might not get is a SUDS approval body. What we might get is stronger guidance and stronger teeth through the existing planning system, and therefore that SUDS would be mandatory now, and again going back through the sort of standard planning approval process, where they'd have to prove very hard why some of those alternative sustainable urban drainage schemes weren't the right answer, whereas at the moment there are other reasons why they can get through the hierarchy quite quickly, and that's why we often not seeing sustainable urban drainage schemes going in on developments at the moment. So I think we'd be keen to see what's possible with this strengthened guidance, but it's not actually bringing in the legislation that was supposed to be part of the Flood and Water Management Act to the beginning. I think there's still a way to go. I think we also need to just look at our own infrastructure schemes as well as a local authority, and look at what's possible through the way that we design the city. And not just for flood management, but for going back to the previous conversations about just managing heat in the city, or managing amenity value and biodiversity as well. There's some big gains from doing schemes with multiple benefits. But if that comes because we've got a stronger planning stick around SUDS, then maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I would most definitely agree with that, and that's what we need, don't we, to be able to make those demands. We all know what's needed, but it's being able to insist on it. I think that's really important. Okay, so where am I on my? Oh, my next one. Again, this is for you, Mark and Jonathan. You talked about partnerships. Is there work going on with the anchor organisations in terms of flood risk?
Yes is the short answer, but I think what we've not done is specifically looked at climate adaptation or resilience plans with the anchors network as such, but I think that could come from the sort of link that Leeds Climate Commission are making with them. We've had very good engagement from the private sector in the Air Resilience Company, and the sort of principle that actually we all need to play a part in adapting to a more resilient future. So I think Leeds again is at the forefront of developing a way of working that says to the private sector, please work with us and contribute to the sort of the outcome that's better for all of us. And by contributing a small amount each, actually we all get the benefits of the combined solution. So that's the principle around the Air Resilience Company, is that we would complement the engineering work that we've done on Leeds Fast with a solution that manages the land better in the catchment. But to do that, we need businesses to contribute to the solution. And actually the principle of that is very well received. And I think maybe what people have been waiting for is something that's quite a practical solution, rather than just saying we all need to do something and it not being that clear what that should be.
Thank you. Okay, that's good. That's good to know. And then my last one was just looking to dig down into your question for us, really, Jonathan, about the policy for flood risk, looking to be more of a kind of an integrated thing with other ideas in terms of adaptation, rather than it being a single issue thing. So I wondered if you could kind of give examples about what you'd like to see in terms of that.
So we did an internal workshop as part of the sort of early stages of refreshing the strategy, and a lot of the themes that were coming out of that were around, we do have a green spaces strategy, we do have an emerging picture around heat, we've got prior to getting the national SUDS guidance, we actually had planning policy updates that we were doing. We were refreshing the local plan, and there's been some questions today about land use and what we use and what we protect for certain things. I think there's guidance emerging around the approach that we take for mass transit and the way that would be delivered and how that would be managed going forward. And the thing that came from the workshop was there's no end of opportunities here to influence policies and influence what we do and the actions that we take and the decisions that we take going forward. What our strategy could really try and help with is to say, how do we create those key hooks or those key triggers for making sure that decisions are considered in this sort of more holistic climate adaptation and climate resilience mould, so that we've not got flood projects doing flood work and then we've got other projects doing their own work without taking into consideration the core design benefits. I think we've got really good examples in the city already where we have made decisions that suit more than one outcome, and that's the direction of travel. Funding often doesn't drive multiple benefits. You know, we've got many different funding bodies want business cases specifically for their outcomes, and I think that's something we've really got to challenge. The government's doing a complete overhaul of flood funding at the moment, but what's become quite clear even through that is that as a local authority, we've still got this much broader, much broader remit than a lot of the sort of single issue bodies have. There's a lot of things on the news again today after the Cunliffe review into the water industry, and I think they talk, you know, there's a real call there for better regulation, but also more integration and more regional and local management. And I think we've got a really important role to play in that as a local authority. So I think ideally our strategy won't be the answer to all of these things, but it has to be written in a way that recognises that other strategies and policies are allowed to exist, and that these things need to be more integrated where possible, and they need to be more complementary to one another, so that we don't do single issue work and we're not working in silos. So it's not easy, but I think that's the outcome we want to try and achieve, is that it recognises that should be the way that we'd like to work.
Thank you. And I think as a committee we would agree with that, wouldn't we? That, you know, that there's a lot more value to having something that says this is us as a city adapting to our changing climate, and these are the things we need to look at, rather than a bunch of separate things that aren't interlinked when clearly they are. You can't just stop one and start another. So, okay, thank you. I'm just going to give people a last opportunity to come in if anybody's got any additional questions. Okay, in that case, thank you everybody for your time in terms of putting the presentations together, coming in, long detailed discussions, and really do appreciate that. In terms of things that we need to take away, so I think we have discussed and considered the key elements. So we've done our job in terms of that recommendation. I think we've definitely got support from us as a committee for shifting the policy to be something that is more holistic rather than a single issue. Rachel, was it you that mentioned heat in the city? So Andrew, somebody mentioned the heat in the city report. If you've not seen it, seen the video or read the report, I strongly recommend that you do so. And we also looked at the idea of how we can make the effectiveness of FAS more public and let people know the job that all that work's doing. And something for us to keep an eye on as well is the subs work. I think that's something that we really need to look at. Okay, thank you. In that case, we are down to the last item, which is dates of future meetings. So there have been some changes to the ones that were in the forward plan. We need to get those out as soon as possible in terms of getting everything in your diaries. The next one is Friday the 19th of September at 9 o'clock, which will be in here, and we'll get the rest of them now that they're all confirmed out to you very quickly. The next working group is the 30th, which is next week, is it? Rachel, is there anything you wanted to say about that?
Nothing in particular, just people should have received documentation. I think there's a couple of background items that will have been sent out by another colleague in Green Spaces, and Climate Energy and Green Spaces. So I look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible.
Thank you, Rachel. So when I emailed all councillors, because anybody can be part of the working group, it's not just SEAT members, and the ask was that you emailed back to express an interest in joining. So if you haven't done that, you won't receive the invitation. So you can either just let me know now rather than track back through hundreds of emails to find that one, and I will put you on the list and you will get an invitation. But it is on the 30th online at 3 o'clock is the plan for that. So just let me know after the meeting if you're not on the list and we'll put you on. I think that is it, unless anybody else has got any comments. Councillor Shazad?
Yeah, just a quick one. We've got members training for council tax on the 30th at 2:30, which is lasting an hour. So that's going to keep quite a few of us off then for until at least 3:30 then.
Yeah, would that be a problem to change the start time to 3:30? No? Okay, we'll do that then. We'll change the start time to 3:30. Okay, thank you. Yep.
Yeah, quick one. Like last time, I thought SEAT members were automatically on there, so I'm one of those who did not reply to the email. So apologies. I thought it was for the other members.
Thank you. That's fine. Perhaps we can just put all SEAT members on, if and that would be easily done and a good idea. So I will do that. I'll make sure everybody gets put on. Yep, revised invites starting at 3:30. Oh, thank you. Okay, that's very sweet. Okay, yeah, we'll do that. We'll send a revised invitation, and then people can accept the council tax one if they'd said no to that. And we'll make sure SEAC members are all on the invitation list as well. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions, and you are free for the rest of the day.